This is very different from the kind of typical male receding hairline kind of hair loss, or is that defined as alopecia as well?
Male pattern hair loss, but it basically, male pattern hair loss is a progressive hair loss condition. So the fact is you can arrest its development and you can make improvements if you...
Emma Gunnar-Wardner of the Emma Guns podcast.
Journalist and public speaker.
I did sort of feel like there was a bit of a target on my back. And I didn't help that situation. I think I said I was quite loud because I wanted to be noticed, but whenever I did get noticed, it wasn't for the right reasons. And I'd end up sort of perhaps getting, I don't know, someone saying something not particularly pleasant to me. I walked out into the world every single day expecting an attack. So I was extremely prickly. So every time I saw someone in the street and they looked at me, they weren't just looking at the person they were walking past. It was like, oh, they were looking down. I had this horrible perspective of the world that everybody was just waiting for that opportunity to take a jab at me. I've put this filter on the world that it's about to attack me. But what actually happened is I became the arsehole.
Welcome to the Second Chance podcast. I'm your host, Raphael Rowe. On this podcast, we talk to people from diverse backgrounds who share their stories of redemption, resilience, and second chance. Go to our YouTube channel so you can watch those interviews, subscribe, share, and click on the notification bell so you don't miss an episode. How is your day today? I mean, what do you plan to do today, I suppose is my first question. What does a day in the life of Emma Guns mean today?
That's a really interesting question because the last couple of weeks have felt really flabby and woolly, and I haven't felt as though I've been productive in the way that I like to be. I like to check things off my to-do list. I like to at least get to the end of the day and the end of the week thinking, well, I got those things done, so that there's progress has been made. And I was a bit worried about coming into this week, honestly. We're chatting on a Monday morning, and because the last 2 weeks haven't been great and I haven't had those regular kind of ticking those things off my list, I didn't want to have a third week. I think 2, you can kind of say, okay, it's the change in seasons, I'm not feeling that well. But when you move into 3 weeks, I think you've got to start sort of taking accountability and think, okay, right, what can I change? And so yesterday evening, I thought, I'm going to plan out my week to the hour. And so I went into my diary and I actually put in everything. So meditation, workouts, walk in the park, this podcast, this prep for this podcast, all of those things, just hour by hour, I've just got the week so that, and I know that might look intimidating, but actually when I look at the diary, I just think all of those things I can check off, and that I know I kind of don't have to mentally engage with it in the same way because it's just there ready for me to just work through.
That's really impressive. It's impressive, but it's also, isn't it pressure? Don't you? I mean, we all have these little checklists, and it's nice to think that every now and again we have to sort of organise. I'm terrible at organising. I do these checklists, and then I try and go through them. I miss one, and then I make another checklist. And I've probably got loads of checklists, tick box checklists all over the place in different books and notebooks and pieces of paper. And I eventually get round to them. But doesn't that make it even more pressured when you have this list? Because if you miss one or two, you think, oh God, I've not done that. So you've not kept to this timetable. Why is a timetable like that, checklist like that, sort of good for you and anybody really?
I think you're absolutely right. I think a couple of years ago that could have been quite dangerous for me because I can tell you, I would have got to mid-morning on Monday and been like, oh, I've already messed up, which I already have this morning. Like I went way over with my workout. But I'm not aiming for perfection. And I think as soon as you take that out of your objective and you stop aiming for perfection, you're not cutting yourself a break, but you just make it a lot easier. And I know that if I'm going through the week and I've plotted it out hour by hour, I know that's to actually stick to that kind of bonkers because there are going to be so many variables that might come into play. There might be a phone call. This is just kind of these are the hours in the day. This is what I would like to do with them. But I'm aiming for imperfect action, not perfection.
But let's go back to when you were a teenager, Emma. I'm really interested in, because, you know, for those who don't know, Emma is involved in the beauty kind of industry, if you like, beauty health industry, and has been for a very long time. I was just looking at some pictures of you with Britney Spears and Davina McCall, and I don't know how long ago these pictures were, but there is some, some impressive people on your friends list or connections list, but also an outright success yourself in terms of your own podcast, which I was on. And anybody that hasn't listened to that needs to go and listen to that because it's terrific. With over 10 million global downloads. And we'll get to this. But let's go back to when you were a teenager, Emma. You're coming to the end of, let's say, your infant school, where you start to discover things for yourself. What was like for you? And where in the world did you grow up?
So I grew up in a small, sleepy village in Kent, which is lovely, and I adore going back to it. But when you are an ambitious young person, it feels like you're just disconnected from everything. And actually, that particular point in time was pretty pivotal for me. This sort of infant school to senior school, because I actually went through some really some physical changes. And the reason why that was significant is because up until the age of around 9, 10, I was just a very active, bubbly little girl who was sort of skinny. And then there was a real shift, and I became really, really fat. Don't really know how else to say it. And I'm saying it about myself. So apologies to anyone who has sensitivity around this subject, but that's the way I articulate it that I feel comfortable with. And actually, the reason why that was significant, and I didn't understand at the time necessarily, but it's something that you can go back and interrogate through adult eyes, is that I learned a really harsh lesson, which is the world treats you differently based on what you look like. Because up until that point, it had been, isn't Emma this? Isn't she lovely? And people would be like, oh, you're buying a little kid presents and dresses and all these things about how they look. And then you become a problem that they're trying to fix because, oh, she probably shouldn't be eating that. So it really shifted. And I remember really understanding that something was different, but it took a long time to understand kind of what was happening internally and how I was processing that. But that was a really significant shift. And I think my personality fundamentally changed at that age because I thought I was wrong and I felt very insecure out in the world because, as well, kids make fun of what they see. So if you are the only person of color in a school, kids are going to make fun of the color of your skin. If you're the fat one, they're going to make fun of the fact that you're fat. Kids point out what is different about a person and use it to needle. So there was that reaction sort of from the adults, and then obviously there was bullying in school.
I'm thinking about teenage girls or girls and boys for that matter going through this kind of period in their life, parents that are having to deal with kids. And I think you hit on something really interesting then when you sort of said those little comments that people make, oh, maybe they shouldn't be eating this. We all do it. We all do it in the presence of young kids who may be changing shape from when they were younger. Oh, you're looking a little bit bigger than you used to be, or your thighs are a bit thicker, or whatever it is that you say to a boy or a girl innocently. But I suspect we all know deep down that that can have a lifelong effect on that child. Something said very innocent, or maybe you shouldn't have so much rice, or maybe you shouldn't have so much whatever it is that they're having. That's too many pieces of a bar of chocolate. To a 9 or 10-year-old who should be sort of scoffing down a bar of chocolate and enjoying it without question, depending on how it impacts their health. Why is that, Emma? When you think back to when you were going through this kind of change as a person, and people were recognizing this change, why do you think it can have such an impact on your personality? And I know what you mean about the physical changes, but what about the psychological changes? As you say, the outward bullying, the outward comments are then digested by the person who's being bullied, who's being commented on, and they don't stand up there and say, don't bully me. They don't stand up there and say, don't say that about too much chocolate. They process it internally. What impact does it have on an individual when it is processed internally, like when it was for you?
I don't know. I think everyone probably processes it completely differently. And I know that for me, it kind of got buried as a dirty secret. I I just felt that you just notice how you're treated differently. And the things that you say carry less weight, or you're not as funny, or you're because I don't know what it is necessarily that makes other people treat you the way that they do, but I was just very aware that there was a real shift in. She's gone from being somebody that people really want to be around and pick up and have pictures with, and then you suddenly are, again, like I say, this sort of problem that needed to be fixed. And I guess when you are little and you are, I don't know, I guess I was kind of quite capricious, quite outgoing, quite kind of, look at me, I'm dancing, as a lot of little girls are. It then sort of became, well, I actually became louder, which is probably not the way I should have gone. And I remember working one of my first jobs, my boss saying to me, "You're just like a typical fat person because you're so funny and you make us all really comfortable and you're always the one who starts the jokes." And I just was like heartbroken because I was being funny and loud, hoping that it was distraction. I was hoping that if they saw my personality, they wouldn't see me physically. And obviously, I understand what I'm saying to you, and I know that that's bonkers. But I definitely started to present in that way of like, look at me, look at what I'm doing, but don't look at this. Listen to what I'm saying. Find me funny. Just give me some positive feedback. So that was how it came out in me. So I was a joy to be around as a teenager, and I was also sullen as well.
How do you even recognise it at such a young age? And I suppose, was it true, or was it your perception of how people were perceiving you and reacting to you? I mean, I say true in the sense that, you recognised before that the pretty dresses that people commented on that looked nice no longer looked nice because these pretty dresses were not the same, or they weren't fitting your small little frame in the same way, or people weren't able to pick you up because you put weight on or whatever it was as you got older. But tell me, was it your perception of how people were treating you? Was it an internal process, or was it genuinely a bit of both? How you were processing people's reaction to your change, or was it really people saying things that were hurtful?
Well, none of this has really made sense. None of it made sense at the time. It's stuff that I've really sort of seen clearly with hindsight. And it was a mixture of my internalizing and how other people were and the comments that were made. Like I remember being at school and going down the slide, and obviously it had to be the tall, thin, blonde girl looked at me and went, "Oh my God, I'd kill myself if my stomach looked like that." And I must have been, I don't know, 10 or 11 at that point. And that was quite like, oh, okay. I'm wrong, I'm bad, and I discuss somebody. And at the time it just felt like a really cruel thing that was said to me. But as time goes on, you kind of think, oh, I think I understand now how that kind of it stuck and made me feel embarrassed about my body. Like I didn't want to go down a slide ever again. Those sorts of things. Like, don't take me to the park. I'm not going to get on a swing or anything, because those sorts of things that happen to you when you're a kid, they really do. You don't realize the impact that they're having when they're said to you. I think it's a lot later that you can kind of look back and say, wow, I understand that stupid little comment that was probably forgotten the second it was said actually really embedded and informed how I behaved. So I think there was a lot of that as well, of just kind of feeling criticized quite a lot. And it was about my appearance and just kind of, I actually know, having done the work that I've done, I definitely disconnected and almost like, I mentioned earlier about I would display a personality and hope people didn't see me. It almost was that. It was like two separate entities. There was me physically and then me as my personality. And I didn't look at myself in the mirror for a long time. I didn't want to see what I looked like. I'd wear the same clothes all the time because I just wanted to cover and camouflage. So I think a lot of damage is done in those early days. But unfortunately, you just can't change kids. They are going to point out the thing about somebody that makes them different from the herd. And I don't know as if you can make kids not do that.
It's an interesting one because it's down to parents listening to what you're sharing here and what other people share about whatever that issue is, whether it's overweight, whether it's spots, whether it's something else. It's important, isn't it, for parents to say to kids, their own kids or kids around them, you can't make those sorts of comments. I mean, you can't stop kids, as you say, doing that, but it's about awareness and education, isn't it? These things always are. How did how did it impact your life then? Because you were sort of disguising who you really were, maybe hiding your feelings, maybe from those around you. At that age, do you share those kinds of thoughts and feelings with anyone? Are you able to share with anyone thinking back? Because as you say, you were internalizing it. It was having an impact. You were dressing to hide yourself. You were doing things that you shouldn't be doing at such a young age, but you were, and lots of kids are. As a grown-up, looking back at yourself, what would have made a difference, if anything?
That's a really interesting question because I think you could go two ways with it. You said something on my podcast about always celebrate the thing about you that makes you different. Make sure you stand out. Don't try and assimilate when you go into a situation. And I think that's really wonderful advice. So, on the one hand, one could say, look at the body positivity and body acceptance movement and say, there's nothing wrong with you, little Emma. You're absolutely fine as you are. Just, you don't look like other people, but they don't look like you, and no one is right and no one is wrong. And you can approach it with compassion. And hopefully, that will then kind of break this idea that you have to be physically perfect in order to be valid, which I think is what I internalized. But at the same time, and this is more aligned with who I am as the woman I am now, is one does have agency to make changes to their body. And I didn't enjoy being a fat kid, and I certainly didn't enjoy being an overweight adult. It's not nice to bend over to do your shoelaces up and have to take a big hulking breath before you do so, because you're just naturally going to kind of asphyxiate yourself by bending over. It's not fun to not run for a bus or miss trains because you can't run for them, like all of these things. And so I really wish I had been empowered earlier or been able to see earlier that I could make changes. And it wasn't about diet and exercise for me. I was using food to kind of fill an emotional black hole. And so I had to correct that behavior before I could even think about diet and exercise, in all honesty. And for years I'd hammered myself with dieting and with exercising, and always had some success, but then I would always go back up to the same weight or even heavier. So I was on this yo-yo cycle, and I couldn't bear it. So what I would really love to be able to have known back then, back when I was a kid, is to kind of deal with, like, what are you using food for? This stuff that you rely on is not great for you. It's not going to make you feel good in the long term. And I think that was kind of what my relationship with food was like. It was kind of a short-term fix. It was a hit. It really was. And I wish I'd been able to look at it as a long game, because that's how I view it now. Is I want to nourish and feed myself to support the training that I do. And I also want to nourish and support myself to not gain weight in the way that I used to. And that's what I wish I could go back and tell little Emma.
But little Emma wouldn't have been able to make the choices about the food that she ate, I suppose. To a certain extent, when you were younger, you're dictated by whatever your parents bring into the household and what's available for you to eat within reason. You can still make choices and say yes and no, and like stuff and not like stuff, and maybe not go into the crisp cupboard or sweet cupboard if there was one. What was your? Let me just ask about your first. Well, not your first job, but when you were young, you were working in the beauty and health industry, working for fashion magazines. And tell me a little bit about that, Emma, because if you were going through this challenging period, I don't know if it was still happening as you become a younger teenager, 15 to 20, but you did, I think, go down a successful path in terms of your career choices. I read that you studied sociology, at university. Tell me a little bit about your educational path that led to your first job, if you like.
So I was at school, and I wasn't clever at all. I kind of scraped by, but I wasn't engaged in anything. My parents really sacrificed to send me to a good school, but perhaps it wasn't a great school for me. And all I wanted to be was a backing singer with Guns N' Roses. And like, that was just like, well, why am I even bothering with this when I want to be on stage with Axel and Slash? And so I wasn't particularly engaged with anything. I didn't pick things up. And so actually, I kind of just skated, sort of just about coasted through school. And actually, I did go on to study sociology at university. And the reason that happened is because I got my A-level results and I got a C and two Ds. So this would have been 1996. And a C and two Ds was basically like, but at my school, it was like, oh my God, why did we even let this woman into the class? And my English teacher, who is Mrs. Riddell, she's no longer with us, but she is absolutely one of the most significant figures in my life, collared me in the corridor. We'd been upstairs collecting our results, and then I walked past the staff room and she was in the corridor, and I was just ashen and like, oh my God, what am I going to tell my dad? Like, I don't have a play. I'm not going to go to university. And that was a big deal. And she just said, I grew up in Kent. She said, you drive down to the University of Kent right here, right now. You find the undergraduate admissions officer and you tell him your story. And you go and you tell him that you need a place. And so I was like, yes, Mrs. Riddell, like sobbing. So I sobbed. I drove down to the University of Kent. My brother had been there. I think he'd just finished. Yeah, he had been at the University of Kent. I think he might have graduated that summer. I drove down. I was like, hi, my name's Emma. I'd like to see the undergraduate admissions officer. And he actually saw me. And I explained that I would really like a place and I know my results weren't great. And he sort of looked at me and I said, oh, my brother came here. He's just graduated. He said, oh, I do like it when brothers and sisters come to the same university. And I sort of sat there and he had this pile of papers, all of these kids' UCAS forms on his desk, all through clearing. And he said every single one, he picked up about 5, he said every single one, better results than you, better results than you. And I was like, yeah, but I'm here. I'm in front of you now. Anyway, he said, okay, fine. You've got 2 places. You can do theology or sociology. And I went, what's theology? And he said, right, sociology it is.
That's an incredible story, Emma. But I'm impressed that you actually, for the first time in your educational career, listened to 2 people. The teacher who told you to drive down to the university, you did what they asked you to do. Whereas it sounds like before that, in the years that you were at school, you weren't really listening, given your results, or maybe you was, and there were different reasons why your results were not what some would expect for you to go onto universities, i.e. your parents. And then secondly, this guy who at the clearing office at the university sort of asked you to make a decision or left you with just 2 choices. How did it change your life then? How did that going down to that university, accepting that you needed to, how did that change your life, if it did at all?
I think I do view it as a sliding doors moment because it could have gone the other way and I don't know what the other way would have looked like. We all like to think that things would have worked out and I still would have found my way to what I'm doing because I love what I'm doing. But I just don't know.
Can I just interrupt you, Emma? Because I'm just thinking, when you describe turning up at the university and like, sort of hands on hip, I'm Emma Guns and I want a place. I can visualize that in some kind of Trinity school kind of play. But before that, you talked a lot about how, being overweight, being bullied was an issue. I'm just trying to get a picture of the Emma between the 2 characters, because there was this persona, hands on hip, I'm Emma Guns, give me a position at this university, and then there feels like there's another Emma. Which Emma was in between those 2?
Well, I think there's basically a highly insecure Emma at the core of it all. And so although I might have presented as turning up hands on hips, I was begging. Like I did go begging because I was desperate and was a highly anxious person as well. So when I walked in there, it wasn't this confident St. Trinian's like, you will give me a place, sir. It was, oh my God, please give me a place. I'm begging you, because I was so panicked about what might happen if I didn't. So I probably have presented two distinct characters, but I think what lies at the center of them all is just high anxiety.
Where's that coming from? Because it suggests to me that the bravery of turning up at a university, as desperate as you were, it's courageous actually. It takes quite a personality to be capable of doing that. Most kids, I think, today would be terrified of doing that, embarrassed about doing that, try and hide the fact that they are desperate because they need to give off a particular image. So I see that as quite courageous, quite a brave thing for you to have done, even if it was done out of desperation. Did you not recognise it as quite a brave and courageous thing to do?
No, and it's funny that it's interesting to me that that's your observation, because I'm very good at doing what I'm told. So when Mrs. Riddell, who was a formidable woman, I hasten to add, said, "You're driving down there," no part of me was involved in that decision. I had been told to do it, so I was going to do it. So I was quite passive in my life, even though I'm telling a story where it's like, and I understand as an adult, I can look back and say, yes, but you could have driven home and watched Point Break, which is what I'd done in the morning before I got my results. You could have driven home and watched Point Break again, which you would have enjoyed. But yeah, something did get you in the car. But it isn't until much later that I'm able to look back and see my part in that. Does that make sense? I just saw Mrs. Riddell told me to go down there and said, right, say these three things. And so that's what I did. So I was kind of a good performing monkey, but I didn't at the time appreciate, and even now when you're saying it to me, I'm like, actually, yeah, you've got a point. I didn't appreciate that I was the one who went in, introduced myself, pled my case. Me, I was just thinking, I'm begging you, sir. I am begging you, because I don't know what my life will look like if I'm not at a university.
You described it as the sliding door moment. Tell me more.
Yeah, sliding doors, because I don't know what I would have done. And I don't know what impact being the only person who didn't get into university in my school would have had. I think that would have compounded a lot of the insecurities that I had, would have probably fed into my anxiety. And I know that when I left university, there was a period where I was temping for a while. So I just always thought I probably would have just kind of temped and just waited for somebody to give me a job, and maybe could have got caught up in just kind of a life I didn't really want, but was secure. So I don't know, and I sort of don't want to pull at that thread too much just sometimes, because it's quite scary.
What did you go on to do?
So I got a job selling software over the phone. That was my first kind of big job after I had done all my temping. And I didn't enjoy it because it was selling software over the phone. I don't know I didn't know what I was selling, truthfully. Do you know what I mean? I don't have much interest in computers. I don't really know what the software did, but it was a really decent graduate salary. And I think it must have been, I must have been about 18 months maybe. And it sounds really twee, but I went to New York, and I remember walking around Manhattan one day. I was on my own and just thinking, I don't know if you've been to Manhattan, and anyone who's listening, Manhattan's just definitely back in this would have been the year 2000, had this incredible energy. It was 2001. And essentially I'd spent some time in Manhattan on my own. And when I'd been there back in 99, after I left university, I went to the top of the Twin Towers. And I don't know if you've been ever went to the top.
I was on the Twin Towers in 2001, a few months before it was taken down, actually.
Wow.
Celebrating my birthday, having a glass of champagne. 3 months later, or 6 months later, it was taken down.
Wow. Windows of the world. Yeah. And so if you go to the top, or I didn't go to Windows of the World, but I imagine you get this perspective that just kind of like, the world is huge. Look at what's happening. And I remember going up there and just kind of having this moment of just thinking, wow, this is amazing. Just like seeing the world from this high. And then I was doing this job, and I was actually in Boston on September the 11th and was trying to get home. I was due on a plane that was leaving Logan that day, and obviously got delayed, couldn't get back home for another 10 days. And just remember thinking, the life that I want to go back to isn't the one that I've made for myself. I can't be selling software for the rest of my life. I want to write for magazines, and I want to write about beauty products, and I want to be in the beauty industry. And so I very tentatively spoke to my father because I was looking for somebody to give me permission to do this. I wasn't ever going to make this decision unless I got permission.
Where did that interest come from, though? Where did that interest for beauty, fashion, writing come from?
Well, I can understand it now. It was kind of, when I put on weight, it turned out, I discovered years later, that I had a hormone issue, which meant that I had really unstable hormones. And so when I hit puberty, I didn't blossom and bloom. I basically got facial hair, got alopecia, put on weight. What else? And kind of change in mood, really bad acne. So it was pretty hideous. And so earlier than a lot of my friends, I found comfort in the beauty pages of magazines because these women were talking about acne solutions and they were talking about skincare. And these were things that I wanted to have an interest in because I wanted to fix my problem. I wanted to fix my acne. I wanted to not have a visible moustache and really big sideburns. Like things were not, my teen years were not kind to me. And so I really clung to those pages. I clung to everything that they said. I would buy all of these different things. I would try all sorts of, I remember even going to the library and just like herbal remedies for acne and chopping up loads of parsley and steaming my face over a bowl of boiling water and parsley because someone had said that would help. And so my interest in beauty really stemmed from that. But then I think there was also this other element to it in that I grew up, or a lot of the media that I consumed at a formative age in the 90s, late 80s and 90s. If you think back to the female protagonist of most chick flicks, they were all journalists. They all worked for magazines. And so I thought, well, if I go and work for a magazine, I will be popular. I will be beautiful. I will be accepted. I will be valid. And again, this is something I've been able to understand many years later. But that's why I wanted a role as a beauty director, because in many ways I thought, well, if I'm the beauty director of a magazine, you can't have a go at me because of how I look, because I must look all right if I'm doing the beauty pages. So there was this weird kind of issue there with it. But then the other fundamental thing was I was this girl who was really struggling, who just wanted problems solved. I wanted my facial hair solved. I wanted my hair loss rectified. I wanted not to have acne anymore. So I wanted to get into beauty in order to be able to problem solve for other people. It wasn't enough to know what the answers were. I wanted to kind of speak to the dermatologist, speak to the formulating chemists, really get into the weeds of it and be able to answer a question that somebody like me would have had and be helpful.
And you did. I mean, what impresses me is that whatever your motive, your, if I can describe it as condition, alopecia, acne, etc., you say was driven by your hormones. It was changes in your physical, biological development, which you have no control over. I mean, probably today there are new medications that do help, can help. Menopause for women when they reach a certain age, for example, is something that I'm starting to understand and learn more about now, and I think most men and women who are not familiar should start finding out more about, and it is being talked about more, which is great to know. But it was a medical condition that led to some of the issues that you were facing. Even so, you used those issues to motivate what you wanted to do. Did you achieve what you set out to do? Because if you did, and I know you did, I'm giving the answer away there, it's quite phenomenal, really, because you're painting a picture of somebody who was kind of trapped in this world where you were struggling with lots of issues, but at the same time, you're on a parallel describing these phenomenal changes, going to Manhattan on your own, living a life that some people can only dream of. So I'm not going to accept that your life was as as frustrating as it sounds, because it also sounds as exciting as it was challenging. Would you accept that?
I'll accept that. And I think a lot of the issues I've had and sometimes still struggle with, oh, it's all internal. So I'm raging this massive battle with myself, but on the outside, you wouldn't know. It's like that whole thing, you never know what's going on in someone else's life. So all of the struggles I've had, they haven't been handed to me. They have been created within me. And so I've had this, I have to overcome it. And so I completely accept that. And I appreciate that observation because I think it's really fair.
You made a success in terms of wanting to, having read the magazine, saw the beauty pages, the health pages, you decided that there was something here that you could do. Did you do that?
Not in the beginning. Not in the beginning. I mean, the other thing I wanted to do is I wanted to reach into. Remember when the Big Breakfast was on Channel 4 in the morning?
Yeah.
And at 10 minutes to the
Yeah.
out, they'd have the news, and then at the end of the news, there'd be a like entertainment section. Well, I would say that the Big Breakfast entertainment section changed my life because I just wanted to reach my hand into the television and go to the Oscars and the MTV Awards and the L Style Awards. I just thought that world looks amazing. That looks so fantastic. And I did that. I've been to those events. I haven't been to the Oscars, but I've been to those events. And that's kind of like, well, that's impressive. But in terms of the kind of the fundamental helping people, when I was on magazines, I was on a celebrity magazine. So you mentioned at the top of the show, pictures with Britney Spears, interviewing Christina Aguilera, interviewing Bette Midler and people like that, like really incredible situations to find oneself in. But it wasn't until I left magazines. And I actually did a stint on QVC. I was a guest presenter. So I'd go on for about 3 years, I would go on and talk about this particular brand. And it really made me understand, which is something I hadn't had on magazines. You're having a direct conversation with the consumer. So if I'm in a magazine and I'm talking about a moisturizer, I'll say it's got these ingredients in, this is the price, this is where you can get it from, right? But if I'm on QVC, I've got to say, if you struggle with dry skin, if you're struggling to find a moisturizer that's really hydrating your skin, if maybe you go out in the morning, you're taking the dog for a walk and you get back and your skin feels really tight and uncomfortable, this is why you need this moisturizer. So you're putting the product into people's hands in a way that you're simply just not doing in the editorial that I used to create. And it made me understand I wasn't having a direct conversation with consumers before. And so I really, really wanted to have a direct dialogue with people. And so that was one of the motivations for starting the podcast, to just have these long form conversations, but also tackle subjects like hair loss. I mean, it's not just beauty stuff, and we've covered tons on the show, but particularly with hair loss, even this morning, I had a woman message me saying, I've listened to your podcast on the subject. I've seen your videos on it. I've seen the progress that you've made. I've made my first appointment with a trichologist. Thank you so much. I've spent thousands on all of these topical solutions. None of them have worked. I'm really hoping this is the answer. And that to me is like, it's Monday morning. I've already had an email. I'm going to save that woman thousands. I'm going to save that woman thousands of pounds worth of money that she was going to spend on things that make claims that don't really, they're not claiming to do what she wants it to do, but she's hoping that the claims are going to give her the result that she wants. And yes, she's going to invest in trichology, and that isn't an inexpensive solution, but results are almost certain down that road. So I'm just thinking, great, I've helped that person. I've opened their eyes to trichology when perhaps in the past they would have thought their only options were a different type of shampoo and conditioner. Now they've come on this journey, and she said she's been watching for a year, come on this journey, seen what I've been through, and now they're like, right, okay, I'm ready to take that step too. And that feels really good because I can feel really confident that whatever happens, whether the trichologist is going to be honest and tell you what's at play and what they can do. And so you're not really dealing with hope with those situations, you're dealing with clinical results, data, case studies. And that I think is so empowering for somebody. So that's what gets me up in the morning.
And it's so good to hear that. But then when I think about all the years that you worked as an editor for, I think it was the OK magazine or one of the it was the OK magazine, celebrity magazines, talking to celebrities, talking about all these beautiful things and all these beautiful products and all this fashion and everything that is so idolized by so many young girls and boys today. And there's nothing wrong with that. But given that what I'm really interested in, Emma, is given that you lived in that life, you know, you worked on those magazines, you stood on those red carpets interviewing those high profile celebrities who probably had on the best dresses and the best makeups and all that. And here you are, I think, saying that sometimes the products that these icons use or that are sold under their names, the brands, etc., are just those products. They don't do what the scientifically kind of tested products or experts. Tell me about that. What is your message there? I'm just drawing on, because I don't know this world at all. I'm drawing on your experience here to find out, you know, everything that we read, everything that we see in these beauty magazines, in this world of beauty and fashion. How much of it is true and how much of it is false? I see pictures, they're doctored. We often, you know, in magazines and all that, I know that these images are doctored to look better than what they are, and then you see people in real life, including myself. You know, post a picture of 5 years ago, I look better than the one that I haven't got stubble or whatever. You know, I might be on a good day or a bad day, and think, oh, that picture looks nicer than that one. What am I asking you? I'm asking you, in your experience, in all the years that you've worked in beauty, fashion, health, you've lived through your own trials and tribulations, your own challenges, yet nobody, apart from yourself and those closest to you, I suspect, were aware of what you were having to deal with. Why is it such a hidden world?
A hidden world meaning, do you mean the claims that products make?
Not so much the claims that products make, just the world that you work in terms of beauty and health and fashion, is so popularized. It's something that everybody wants to see into. Yet someone like yourself who works in that world were having challenges and struggles with everything that world represents. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I wanted to be in that world because I thought it would validate me. And it didn't, actually. It was probably the worst scenario I could have put myself in all honesty. But we can get onto that later. It is... The thing is, it's a business. I think you've always got to understand health and beauty. It's business, and it's not a small business either. We're talking billions. And that must never be underestimated. And I think I've always come down to this point of there are fundamentally there are two different types of beauty consumer. I think there's the one who really enjoys the sort of pageantry, the ceremony of applying products, what that having that perfume bottle in their handbag or on their dressing table says about them, just the packaging, not actually the juice inside. The person who wants to use an expensive moisturizer because they want to use an expensive moisturizer. And then you have perhaps the more results driven consumer. Now that's definitely who I have turned into, because I wanted to be, spritzing the nicest perfumes and surrounded by all the expensive stuff. I used to do beauty sales on the magazine, a bit of a side note. And so it basically once or twice a week, I would empty the beauty cupboard because we were the best selling magazine, weekly magazine at the time. We'd get everything. So I would just not have any room. I had one small cabinet. So I would just get my arm in and just throw everything on the floor and be like, do a whistle. And everyone would come running. And people nearly broke arms, leaping for the creme de la mer and leaping for these really expensive labels. And I completely understand that, because you think you're getting more expensive stuff, you're getting better. And what I've come to understand is actually it's formulation and ingredients. And sometimes those things don't come with the heftiest price tags. So I want results. So I use active ingredients, clinical grade ingredients. And there's not much kind of flannel with that. There's not much ceremony. It's kind of you put it on and then you let it do its job. There's no massage it in for 5 minutes, spritz your face. There's no 7 layers of something. But if somebody wants that, I'm never going to take that away from them. What if you work a job that really grinds your gears, really gets you down? And yet when you get home at night, knowing that you're going to take your makeup off and apply those 7 steps of skincare is going to be the thing that kind of brings your anxiety down a notch, makes you feel as though you're looking after yourself, and you like how it makes your skin feel. not going to take that away from anybody, but it's just being realistic about what that's doing. So that kind of beauty ritual has much more meaning in it in many ways, whereas where I've sort of taken my focus, because I said a little while ago, I'm all about problem solving. I want results. I don't want to go to a facial and have somebody sort of with plinky plonky music in the background just kind of tap at my face for an hour. I want somebody to take off all the dead skin, do an extraction. I kind of want a little bit of pain in there, because at the end I want to see a result. It depends what you want. So I guess in answer to your question, I was really attracted to the fluffier side of things, and I'm really cheered that I have found something much more meaningful through that journey. And that kind of has been my journey with it all, the results side of things. And
Is that a mature thing? Is that out of knowledge, experience, that you've reached that point? And do you think that it's making a difference? Is it making a difference? I get it that, sitting in front of somebody who can really make the skin on your face work and deal with any issues that, tiredness or, the weather as kind of, we all want that. But has it worked? Has it helped you now? Because you mentioned that the issues you faced when you were young, you still face as an adult. Is that true? Of these anxieties and other issues live with you all this time?
yeah, I think I realize now I was probably depressed when I was a kid and also anxious. And then that really kind of hit a peak a few years ago, and I kind of broke down. There were lots of self-esteem issues going on, in that there wasn't any. Um, and so that's why going into quite a high profile kind of shiny media job wasn't perhaps great for me. Um, and so I guess in some ways I've been able to deal with the external stuff that I had to kind of cope with, but I have also done the work on the internal as well, of try and be less anxious. I understand now that I spent 10 years in a job that on the surface was my dream job. I think I might have said this to you last time we spoke, but I didn't enjoy it because I was just too anxious about it. It was like the sword of Damocles hanging over my head. Here's my dream job. And I thought every day it was going to get taken away from me. So I just couldn't enjoy it. And I used to get really angry at people who could, but they obviously weren't dealing with this idea that something could get taken away from them. But I created that. I kind of created this in my head that I wasn't worthy of it. So I was the one who created this jeopardy around this job. No one else really. I mean, there were a few things going on internally, meaning internally in terms of office politics and what have you. But I got to where I wanted to be, but a little bit like going down to the undergraduate admissions officer, and it's taken you to say to me, that was really ballsy. I needed somebody else to validate. I constantly needed validation that I was going to be okay, my job was safe, all of these sorts of things. And that just speaks to somebody who's not got great sense of self-worth and is also highly anxious, which is definitely what I was the whole time I was in that role, which is something I should have maybe worked on before I got into that role.
Not necessarily, because it sounds to me, gosh, this is a conundrum for me, because it sounds like you've achieved so much in terms of, being in that position where you are the editor of this fashion magazine, the biggest selling fashion magazine, this influential thing. You're doing all the things that you want to do, and lots of young wannabe presenter journalists, male and female, would want to be doing, yet you're in this position. So I'm trying to understand and have so much respect for the fact that you talk about openly about your anxieties and other issues that you were dealing with. Were they a chemical, biological issue? Because it feels to me that nothing was stopping you achieving your goals and your ambitions, because you have been very successful in your career, except you and what's in your head. So I'm trying to understand whether it's a chemical or biological thing that you had to deal with, and whether you have been able to deal with it as an issue, or whether it's a combination of something else.
So I do think I don't know whether it was biological or chemical, but I do know that, And I guess we could go back to the time in school. I did sort of feel like there was a bit of a target on my back, and I didn't help that situation. I think I said I was quite loud because I wanted to be noticed, but whenever I did get noticed, it wasn't for the right reasons, and I'd end up sort of perhaps getting, I don't know, someone saying something not particularly pleasant to me. And I think what I've understood through therapy is that I walked out into the world every single day expecting an attack. So I was extremely prickly. So every time I saw someone in the street and they looked at me, they weren't just looking at the person they were walking past. It was like, oh, they were looking down. I had this horrible perspective of the world that everybody was just waiting for that opportunity to take a jab at me, a verbal jab, whatever it might be, or bring me down. And I don't know where that came from, but that definitely was a factory setting. It became a default emotional setting for me. It was like, that person's going to get at me. That person's going to get at me. I felt like the world was against me, right? And there's in some self help books, they say, you see what you want to see. So if I said to you, right, after this, go for a walk, and I want you to notice everything that you see that's red, all you're going to see is red because you've primed your brain to see red. Or it could be yellow, or it could be blue. You know what I'm saying? And I think the setting I was on was look for an attack, look for it before it happens. And actually, so I've put this filter on the world that it's about to attack me. But what actually happened is I became the arsehole because I was so prickly and I was so ready to defend myself. Like if someone's constantly like balled up, ready to attack, they're not a nice energy to be around. And so that's definitely something I've had to unravel and unpick through. And I have had the help of an excellent therapist. And I keep doing that work all the time because it's like anything. You can make a lot of progress, but progress isn't linear. And you can sometimes find yourself in situations where you feel uncomfortable. I feel uncomfortable and I think, oh, I'm being a bit prickly here. It's because I'm nervous. It's because I'm feeling anxious. It's because I feel insecure. So it's having that presence of mind now to be able to stop it before it kind of is visible to anybody else. As long as if I sense it, I'm like, right, how do I shut you down?
But then you did work in a world where I suppose people were constantly judging each other. Is this product better than that product? Does that model look better than that model? Is this dress or pair of trousers better? I suppose you lived in a world where everybody was judging, and you had to make decisions, I suppose, depending. I think your role was, as editor, you had to make decisions, and therefore, gosh, it just seems justified that you were kind of always on your guard, always sort of protecting yourself from other judgment because you had to make an ultimate decision that could have an impact. Is that right or wrong?
Yeah, no, my role didn't really include that. So I was the editor of the beauty section and then did fashion subsequently. So it wasn't kind of the sort of stereotype that one might think of fashion magazines. It was very much just about, let's do a shoot. There wasn't kind of any competitive any of that going on in that way. It was more sort of product placement. So it was a calmer, more benign sort of. I'm sure it's like that on other magazines where it is a bit more plugged into fashion, but for me it wasn't necessarily like that. And I don't know, I mean, it wasn't made better by that particular working environment, but it was definitely this, all of the seeds of that were sown as a kid, and just being very defensive and just always being like, are you looking at me funny? I wasn't saying that, but that was just, I walk out of the house in the morning and
And you think that was driven by, you talk about that moment on the slide, and that's the image that comes back to me when you talk about a lot of what you've been talking about, that person who makes a comment about, your tummy, it is the scar, the mark that has lived with you forevermore. Have you been able to lose the impact of a comment like that now, Emma? Are you able to live your life without thinking about the things that you struggled with?
Yeah, because I think at some point you have to kind of tie a bow around it and say, that's what was. I wish it had been different, but it wasn't. So what am I going to learn from it? And it wasn't just the physical stuff. Like my personality was, I'm sure everyone gets this though. I don't think I'm a particular outlier, but there were lots of criticisms. I felt criticized a lot. I wouldn't even say bullied. I would just say criticized. And so I'd say something that would be wrong. I'd do something that would be wrong. And I think that's kind of what formed this really prickly character who just thought that everyone was going to attack at some point. But yes, you have to at some point say, yeah, do you know what, that happened and it sucked. And it wasn't a great experience, but there's so much to be excavated out of that and learned. Like, actually, when you think about it, yes, it did affect me deeply and I let it win, but you get to kind of undo all of that. And I think that actually has been really exciting and empowering work to kind of, and be really honest as well. Like, no one likes to, I don't like sitting in front of people and saying, oh God, I realized I have my dream job and I was a complete dick. No one loves saying that. I want to be able to say, I got my dream job and I'm so well loved and I did it perfectly. But you're put on this earth to learn. And I sometimes look at people who look as though they've got all the answers, and I feel really jealous because any situation they go into, they just deal with it perfectly and no one has a bad word to say about them. And I just think, where's the learning curve? Like, there's actually something brilliant about being imperfect and getting to improve. And I think, again, I've spoken about those 90s rom-coms with all the protagonists that were in journalism. I also grew up on media where a lot of these stories were these kids who were given one chance and then were perfect. You think about it, all of those films that we watched growing up where they always had it in them and they didn't need to do the movie montage where they had to learn a skill like Rocky did. Like, I would rather be Rocky and have a movie montage where you see the progress I've made because of the effort that I've put in, than to have it all just be on the plate and there and ready and in front of me, because that doesn't seem very exciting to me.
It's interesting because you hit the nail on the head when you said there that that person who comes in, does the job and does it perfectly, actually externally they can show that. But as you said yourself, you know, we have sometimes these two personalities, the face in one, and then that person who is perfect might be going back home and terrorizing themselves, tormenting themselves. In the same way that you did. So on the face of it, they may be solving all the problems and everybody does love that person or likes the way that they do things and they seem very relaxed and less stressed than everybody else, even though they are in the most difficult position. But who knows what's going on, you know, behind closed doors and in their personal life, you know, and you don't discover that until you discover it. You started your podcast to enlighten people about the issues around health and beauty in particular, or was it a podcast where you just wanted to have these deep and meaningful conversations, as you said, around the beauty health industry?
It was more the latter. It was more the fact that when I worked on a magazine that didn't have a lot of column inches in the beauty and fashion pages, and so it was very short snippets like product name, price, where you could buy it. And yet, because I had quite a high profile role and people wanted to get me in front of these brand founders, I would sometimes sit for an hour talking to people who had built brands from nothing. And I'd hear these incredible stories. And it was always a real shame to me that I couldn't platform those stories in the magazine. And then I did QVC and I kind of understood the consumer journey a bit more. And then I was actually really listening to a lot of podcasts at the time. I was listening to a lot of American podcasts. I was listening to Tim Ferriss a lot, to Joe Rogan. And I really loved those kind of no holds barred, long form chats where you really got to know somebody. And I thought that's something that we just don't get to see and hear in the beauty industry. And so that was the reason why it started. But then what subsequently happened, so I started in 2016. What subsequently happened is a little while later, I like fully broke down. I really had to put a pause on. I just really lost all sense of who I was. And it was really dark. And I realized that what I've been doing is I've been putting myself in front of successful people and asking them for help, basically going, how did you overcome all of your struggles? Because I was hoping that within their answer, my solution would lie, because I felt very lost. I didn't feel successful. When you have a job that a million people would do, you don't make a lot of money. I felt like I got to my late 30s and I was an abject failure. And to your point, I'm sure that from the outside it wouldn't have looked like that. But to me, I felt like I'd just messed it all up. And as we've already established, I'm quite good at getting very loud in my own head and really beating myself up. And so that's basically what happened. And so the podcast kind of naturally evolved once I picked myself up to talking to those people still about health and beauty and finding the elements of value within the beauty or health story, but also just that individual story. Because, like, friends of mine have got tanning brands, and there's no blueprint for success to create a tanning brand, right? But they've done it. And it's the same with some of these makeup artists who started out as makeup artists who were in store every day, who've gone on to make millions and millions of pounds as YouTube stars. I really wanted to unpick that. Like, what did it take? And spoiler alert, listener, it usually takes consistent effort over time. Like, there's no magic bullet. That's the thing. The thing I say most on the podcast is consistent effort over time equals results. It's boring. It's not sexy. You can't sell it as a pill. It's not going to make you billions of quid. If you just say to something like me with my press ups that I do on Instagram, I wanted to do a press up, couldn't do a press up. How have I done press ups? By showing up every day and trying to do a press up. That's how I got there. It took months, but I can
How
do.
many press ups can you do now?
Well, this morning I did 6.
Right, congratulations.
Thank you. I mean, I still want to be able to do more, and my form needs to be better. But the point is, the progress that I've made has been made because of one really simple thing. I got on the mat every day. I got into a plank. I lowered myself down. I tried to push myself back up. It's as simple as that. And it's so boring. It's so boring. I think we look for magic bullets. We look for these things that will kind of click your fingers and you'll get what you want. I mean, we can really unpick the diet industry for that. But actually, as with anything, it's about every single day putting one foot in front of the other. And that's really one of the biggest takeaways I've taken from the show up to this point.
I get the feeling talking to you, Emma, that you know, there is this roller coaster in your personality, in your life, in your journey, where you're at, where you want to get to. You know, there is part of you that's content, but it feels to me that in all these years that you've been working in the industry that you've been working in, the work that you've been doing around your podcast, etc., that there is still within your voice. What is it that I'm trying to say? That within your voice there is still something that's quite powerful but so weak at the same time, that you're still searching, but you've already found that you are determined to achieve the press ups, for example, but you've already achieved it because you couldn't do one, you can now do 6. So you've done it 6 times over what you first wanted to do. So there's this conundrum, and I suppose lots of people live in that world where there is this conundrum. What is the ultimate goal? What does someone like yourself, who has experienced the things that you've experienced, overcome the challenges? Because looking at you now, it doesn't look like you've got alopecia right now. So you've overcome that issue, whether it is something that resurfaces, but you addressed the issue and dealt with the issue and should be able to move on from that issue. You don't look overweight to me, so it looks like you've dealt with that issue. You know, I think I'm of an age where no matter what I do, I'm always going to have a little bit of chubs going on somewhere on my physique, and you can't keep on doing the gym for the whole of your life, or at least not as consistently. So I suppose my question is, what is the ultimate goal? Because it sounds like you have a problem, you deal with it, it's done, you can move on. And I'm just trying to understand where it is that you're looking to get to.
That's a really good question that's a really good observation, because I think I do have that, and it's something I work on. I do have that issue with my personality where I'm always thinking about the next thing. As much as I try to find contentment in the here and now and be like, this is exactly what I want to be doing, I'm always looking at the shiny thing in the future. More listeners, more followers on Instagram, better results. I'm always looking to do better. And actually, I remember a few years ago, a friend saying to me, what about if this year was just the same as last year? Wouldn't that be great? But I do have this thing where I'm like, right, I've done 1 press up, now I want to do 10. And immediately, and then so there's that lack of kind of, as we've already established, actually just championing, celebrating the achievement. You want to do 1 press up, you did it. And as soon as it's done, imagine this. I do 1 press up for the first time. Can you imagine what happened next? Do you think I stood up, or do you think I tried for number 2?
I think you tried for number 2.
Exactly. So
And
I
there's nothing wrong with that, is there? But you did achieve your goal and could quite easily have just rolled over and then had a glass of champagne.
I should have done that. But I think I like being ambitious. I like thinking about what's next. What can I do next? What can I keep achieving? I love that. But at the same time, it comes at the expense sometimes of being satisfied, of being content. And it does bring with it, as you can probably tell, and I'm this has been like a great therapy session. What comes with it sometimes is an anxiety, bit of right, okay, well, I've got to achieve this now. And immediately I'm moving my own goalposts all the time and creating almost a friction in my life that doesn't need to be there because guess what? I'm the one who's put it there. So maybe I should, maybe I should calm down on that.
But you know what? What I love, and the reason we're exploring this, or I'm exploring this more, is because it is about recognition, isn't it? And you do recognize what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong, what you like, what you don't like, what's good, what's bad, why you think this is something that's going to cause you anxiety. If you didn't, it would be more concerning. When I say you, I mean lots of people. If you didn't recognize these things, then it means that you're not identifying something that other people are identifying. Now, if you can, and you do this, it sounds like better than most people, you identify your weaknesses and your strengths. And surely that has got to be, and you're using the weaknesses and the strengths that you've identified as a person throughout your life, in your work, in your career, and you're now sharing that experience, that knowledge, that insight with the many hundreds of thousands that listen to your podcast or come to your Instagram page and look at and watch you doing your press up. That's what I find so impressive. But do you still question that? Is there a need to still question that? Why do people still question that?
Question what specifically?
The wanting recognition from other people that you've done what you are doing yourself. You're recognizing your own strengths and weaknesses. Why is it important that you get external recognition, whether it is by more followers on Instagram or showing people that you've done 2 press ups or even 4 press ups now or 6 press ups? Why is there this? And I don't mean it just Emma. I mean, why is it that people constantly reach out looking for recognition?
I think that's really interesting, and something actually made me completely change my social media methodology a little while ago, because I thought I was posting to get likes and be validated, and I wanted to post. I needed those posts to find the people that needed to find them. So shifting it from whether I get likes or not to whether that content is helpful is what I try to shift it to, because I agree. I see some people, and it's not to be critical of them. I think we're all doing our own thing, and you think that definitely didn't need to be posted. There's this element of oversharing, and so I always try to come at social media or my podcast or anything from an editorial point of view. Like, who will this benefit? What story am I trying to tell? How am I trying to be helpful? What will the listener leave with? And hopefully, and that's why I talk about getting more listeners, because I think, well, if I really want this episode, say it's about hair loss, because we've talked about that a little bit, I know this is jam packed with everything, every single question that any woman or man might have about hair loss. I know this is jam packed with information. I know I've got one of the best trichologists in the country on my podcast talking through every single aspect of it. I want that to reach as many people as possible, because I think I've created something really valuable and really helpful. So that's the position I come from when I think, oh, I want to achieve more. I want to build an audience, because I think I'm creating things that are helpful and useful, and that people will finish listening to and think, I'm so glad I listened to that.
I think they do already, don't they? I think you've had a phenomenal success with your podcast, even though the direction has changed, to deal with more, pointed issues, like alopecia or something. Whilst we talk about it, tell me about your own story on alopecia and why this became an issue for you and how you dealt with it, and why you have the leading expert on your podcast talking about it, how you got to that point.
So my alopecia first started when I got diagnosed, well, when I had symptoms of polycystic ovarian syndrome when I was a kid, so about 12. I got diagnosed when I was 17. But I was basically put on the pill to regulate my hormones. So it didn't have any impact on my hair, but it cleared up my skin a treat, which was fantastic. So for years, I've just had a very thin hairline. And I used to wear my hair in a side parting because this is why I wear a center parting now, because I'm like, I can. And I've painted it in a little bit today. But it was this sort of pattern thinning here. So it's a triangle. And this is really typical of female pattern hair loss, as it kind of moves back in a triangle like this, and it's progressive. So it's just going to get worse over time. And I had tried all of the over-the-counter things, and I was very lucky when I was on OK. I had a discount card to go and see pretty much every hairdresser, like big name hairdresser, for free. It was like, oh yeah, you can book it's 100% discount card. You can go in and see Nikki Clark, Richard Ward. I mean, think of all the really like Larry King, all of these amazing people. And so we would just do bouncy blow dries, but we would never talk about the fact that my hair was thinning. There's one hairdresser, Adam Reed, who I've been seeing for about 20 years, who used to suggest supplements and what have you. But I was just using these over-the-counter things, and there are various brands like Nioxin. They would very kindly top me up with a supply. They'd look, when I'd go to their press days, they'd look at it and say, yeah, your hair's definitely thinning. And the real progress I was able to make was to go and see a trichologist. And that happened actually during lockdown. So in 2020, Philip Kingsley, the brand, approached me and said, would you like to have, we're doing online consultations in lockdown because we can't do it in the clinic. Would you like to have a consultation with Annabelle Kingsley? And I said, you darn tootin' I would. And I was extremely nervous because my hair was a lot thinner than it is now. And I was really nervous as well because I didn't want to find out that I needed a treatment that was going to cost me a lot of money that I couldn't then pay for. And that was one of the reasons I'd always steered away from a trichology solution, because these things aren't inexpensive. And they're also, once you start, it's like moisturizer. If you use a moisturizer one day, your skin's hydrated. If you then stop using it, your skin won't be hydrated. It's the same with trichology. With the treatments, you have to keep using them in order to get the results. And if you stop using them, it will regress. So I had real anxiety about that, because I think I've said, you have a job a million people would do. You don't earn a huge amount of money. And so I didn't want to find out that the thing that would solve it would be out of my price range. But as it turned out, I had the consultation, and Annabelle over Zoom said, I'm almost certain that you've got androgenic alopecia, but we'll get you in clinic once lockdown is lifted to confirm the diagnosis and look at you properly. And so then I saw a wonderful trichologist called Susie Hammond. And again, it's this consistent effort over time. And it was one of those experiences where this was another example of it really working, because it was, here's what you need. Here are the topical products that you can apply. This is the advice about how to look after your hair that we would recommend to make sure that you don't lose any more. Don't look for results for 3 months. Just don't look for results. Just be really consistent, and then come back and see us in 3 months and we'll look under the microscope. And actually putting your faith in the fact that that action every day, in the morning and in the evening, is going to have a result was really, again, it was like, oh, I'm really understanding this. Consistent effort over time equals results. And so that was May 2020. So it's been over 2 years, and it's like having a completely different head of hair. And I want that for everybody who was in the position I was in and who has a condition that can be treated. I really do, because I didn't realize, it was one of those things where in the morning it took a little bit of time to like style my hair a certain way, because so that I didn't expose where it was really thin and where there were some bald patches. And now it's just because of those 2 actions I do, morning and evening, I don't have to think about it. I just part my hair down the middle and I'm off. And I want that for anyone, because for anyone who's ever tried to do a comb over, male or female, not having to do it anymore, it's just feels quite wonderful.
Do you know whether it's a prevalent issue? Is it an issue, alopecia? Is it something that affects both lots of men and women in this country and globally? I don't know if it does.
Yeah, there's lots of different types of hair loss. Alopecia is one. There's they've got lots of interesting names. So mine's androgenic alopecia. There's also another type of alopecia. There's telogen effluvium. There's alopecia that manifests in like the little patches. Then there's the progressive. So there's lots of different types. And mine
this is very different from I'm just saying, Emma, this is very different from the kind of typical male receding hairline kind of hair loss. Or is that defined as alopecia as well?
It's similar. I don't know if alopecia is the right term for male pattern hair loss, but basically male pattern hair loss is a progressive hair loss condition. So the fact is you can arrest its development and you can make improvements if you treat it accordingly. And I was talking to someone the other day and he's losing his hair. And he said, well, it's because I've got loads of testosterone. And so my testosterone literally kills my hair. And like, look at Jason Statham. And I'm like, you're really putting a spin on something here, which I respect what you're doing. But again, basically, it's a sensitivity to the male hormone. Your follicles are sensitive. And what happens is over time, it just shrinks the hair. So it can't grow as long and it just gets shorter and shorter and thinner and thinner. And then eventually the follicle just gives up because it has this sensitivity. So if you can use something, and again, that has to be given to you by a trichologist that can deal with that sensitivity, then that miniaturization of the hair follicle won't happen.
God, you know so much about it, and that's simply because of your experience with it. One question, just one final question on that is, all these sort of celebrity hairdressers, are they not educated in this same space? Because it sounds like, you went along, lots of people have been along, they've treated your hair in style wise, but in terms of issues, it sounded a little bit like they had no solution for that, no real solution.
I think it would be unfair to sort of put that on the hairdressers. They are really excellent at styling, at cutting, at dyeing, coloring, all of these things. And I don't actually think it's necessarily their job to say, imagine sitting in a hairdresser's chair and him saying, oh, it looks like you've got a sensitivity to your male hormone, want to get down to a trichologist.
But you want that. I think you would. If they're the person that sees it first, and you're sitting there, and I can imagine people sitting in that hairdresser's chair hoping that they don't see it because they're pretending that they're not suffering from it, where a little nudge saying, you do realize your hair's getting thinner, and if you deal with it now, it will be a lot easier. Then allow that. I mean, that's my kind of way of thinking. I'm thinking if they have any experience and insight in what alopecia means and they identify it in one of their clients, surely they should be the first person to say, look, go and see a trichologist, or go and see somebody who might be able to provide some kind of help before this becomes a bigger problem. And even if it might be a bit of an embarrassing conversation, I'm sure they would appreciate it.
I think it depends on the relationship you have with your hairdresser, to be honest. And I think I don't know because I haven't actually asked a hairdresser, but now I will definitely ask. I wonder whether it's almost like a kind of rule of don't bring it up unless the customer does.
Okay, that's really good. So what does the future hold, Emma? You've got this phenomenal podcast, and obviously you're still doing consultancy work around beauty, health, brand products, and stuff like that. What is your I hesitate to say day job because very few people have a day job unless it's a 9 to 5 day. So what is it that you're doing at the moment that you enjoy doing at the moment beyond your podcast?
Well, that's a really good question. So this year I have thrown lots of things up in the air, and so there's a lot of change. So actually, I can't answer that question in a way that would be as I maybe would have done a couple of years ago, because actually everything looks very different at the moment. I love creating the podcast. I want to redirect it a little bit just because I've been doing it nearly 7 years. And I feel as though there's been a lot of, there's been a journey that I've been on as much as the listeners have. And I think one of the things that I've really kind of faced up to in the last couple of years is my own part in the stuff that has made me unhappy. And I think once I saw that and stopped blaming external sources or other people or other things and started making myself accountable, I think that's where actually I've made the most progress in my life. And so I want to bring that tone to the podcast because I think actually taking ownership, understanding that you have agency, I think a lot of us, me included, and I say this because this was the position I was in, and I would say no one is ever fully recovered necessarily, but is this idea that life happens to you, that you don't have agency. And I think that's false. I think actually, yes, there are going to be some situations where you don't have agency, where terrible things happen and you're stuck. But I think there are a lot of the things that people battle with, as I think we've probably established during this conversation, I created a lot of them myself. And there I was thinking that a bad boss or a mean colleague or a bully was in my way. And often the actual obstacle that I couldn't get over was the one I was refusing to see. And that obstacle was me.
Most of the time, but not
Most of
all
the
of the
time.
time, because sometimes it can be a
Yep,
combination
it can.
of that bully or of that person. It just kind of manifests itself differently within. That's brave.
Yeah, that is, isn't it? Brave or
But
stupid.
it is. I think it is, because sometimes we hide behind our personality. So it sounds like you've reached that point in life where you are now holding yourself accountable. And as we started this conversation, you've done that by demonstrating that you've written this list that you're going to, fulfill, because you the last couple of weeks have been a little bit challenging. And so you wrote this list to help you get back on track, or the track that you think you need to be on. You hold yourself more accountable.
Yeah, I think, I definitely just got to a point where I was sick of complaining, and I was a great complainer. I was such a great complainer and a whinger. And I got sick of it. I got sick of my own bullshit and just was like, well, how does this end? Well, stop whinging, stop complaining, start doing, what's the problem here? Can you fix it? Well, then, okay, let's put the things in place. Let's change things. And I know that sounds very idealistic, and not every single situation can just be as black and white as that. And not all of the things I've had to deal with have been black and white, but I just think it's that coming back from the right. What can I do here? Yes, this situation's absolutely crap and that's crap, but what can I actually do? Because that's all I can control. So I'm going to try and do the thing that will be the best for me and will make me feel good in the short and long term, hopefully.
And changing direction in your podcast is one of those things. I suppose your podcast is almost a full-time job, isn't it? I know how difficult it can be running your own podcast. If you've been doing it for 7 years, you've probably learnt all the tricks and trials and tribulations, but it still costs. It still involves many different things. But you're changing its direction.
Yeah, and I think in lockdown, because I wasn't traveling, because we were at home and I lived by myself, I was like, right, well, I was doing one podcast a week, so I'll do two. And then two very quickly turned into three. And that's just been unsustainable this year. And actually, I got to the point where I thought, God, I haven't felt like this for a while. I think I've overdone it. So I had to take a step back, reduce my output, and actually give myself a bit of space to actually think about, right, what direction do I want this to go in? How do I want to do that? Rather than just constantly surrounding myself with do and make, right, I've made one, I'll make two, I'll make three. Paring it all back a little bit has been really difficult because it's not in my nature to do less, but it's actually been really valuable because it's made space for what will come next.
And that's what I'm interested in. So are you still working in the sort of brand beauty space? Are you still writing for publications? Because I know you've written for lots of different publications over the years. I mean, is that still a space that you're working in, or are you pushing that to one side to do other things?
I'm not writing for magazines or newspapers anymore. If I'm asked to write something, I will very flattered, and I'll consider it depending on what the subject matter is. But it's not a priority at the moment. The priority is really putting the effort into the podcast. Like you, I do video production now. It used to only be audio, but you can't really have a podcast now unless you're creating video at the same time. That's a massive investment. That's a huge change in kind of what I think most people started podcasts because it was really inexpensive to do so. You didn't need to be that technical. And now all of a sudden, if you want to compete, you have to be competing and it's going to cost you money. So that's been a big shift. And I really, not really want to, I have started writing a book about my weight story, because I think I'm not alone. I think I'm like a lot of people out there who can't understand why they aren't losing weight and really want to. And so this sits not with it. It's not anti-diet, it's not body positivity, it's not body acceptance. It's actually about what's getting in the way. Because for me, a lot of the time, what was getting in the way of it was this fact that I had this emotional eating, and there was this I assumed that once you lost weight, you didn't have to try. Just you didn't have to try. I'm laughing because it's kind of ridiculous. I thought that once you got to your goal weight, that was it. You could just crack on. Didn't realize you'd immediately like put 3 stone on in the space of 4 months. So all of these sort of things that you just look back and think, oh God, you're such an idiot. It was so obvious. So I really want to tell that story because I don't believe I'm alone in being that person who was dissatisfied with being in the shape I was in and wanted to change it, but really struggled to get there. So I want, again, it creating what I hope will be something of a manual that will also tell my story, that will be helpful for the person who hasn't been able to put 2 and 2 together for their own journey.
And tell me a little bit about that, because we explored some of the issue when you were younger, when you first identified that your body shape had changed, comments were being made, and that kind of propelled us into a discussion about the psychological, the mental impact that something like that can have. But we didn't really, until here at the end, you started talking about your problem with weight over the years and exercise. What was that problem, Emma? I mean, is it more than what you talked about at the beginning, where your hormones had changed and therefore changed your body shape and lots of other things, or was it more than that?
I think it was more than that. I think hormones play a certain role, but ultimately the hormones, like I'm understanding, made me hungrier, but that hunger wasn't necessarily real. And I think I also had I found comfort in food, as a lot of people do. So yeah, it was kind of, things weren't really in my favor hormone wise, but there were also, it was my behaviors fundamentally that informed the shape and weight that I would always go back up to. So I'd be brilliant. Like I'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd go to the gym before work every single day. I'd then go back to the gym and do a class or a spinning session. So I would hammer it, and I would get down to whatever weight I was, but I was very much about perfectionism. It was like 7 days a week, and I could only eat these things. And if I ate anything else, that was really, really bad, and I had to atone for it. And that's a really horrible cycle to be on, because all it takes is one blowout or one cold where you can't get to the gym for 3 days. And in my head, I'm like, oh, I've ruined it all. I've ruined it all. So that's why I said right at the top, I aim for imperfect action. I do consistent effort over time. And sometimes you can't do it as regularly as you want. But as long as you just keep hammering, keep doing it, be consistent. And I think in the past, I used to approach weight loss with real kind of like Hulk Hogan. Like I had to be flexed and panicked, and it was all I could think about. And it was just this really kind of energy. I can't think of a word to describe it. I'm so sorry. But now it's much but it's much calmer. It's much less about I've got to be perfect, I've got to be 100%. Now it's like, it's really, really great if I show up today. And if I didn't, again, you have to be accountable. Like, did you not show up because you couldn't be bothered, or did you not show up because you were out all day and you didn't get to eat until 5? Like, I think it's just being really realistic with yourself. But I think what I want to do with the book is kind of take that sort of being in first gear with the pedal to the metal and everything, kind of the engine screaming at you, away from people, and actually arm them with the tools that will make it a much more peaceful thing. Like it's not, it doesn't have to be as stressful as we make it. And there's all this external pressure about how bodies should look and what have you. And just like forget about that. How do you feel? And what do you want to achieve? Okay, well, these are the things that might be standing in your way. Let's just unpick them and see if we can't make you see it in a new way that is really helpful and gets you to where you want to be.
And has it gotten you to where you want to be? Have you found the method to overcome your hunger or eating too much and not exercising enough? Like you said, you went at it like, but now, have you found your own method, Emma? I mean, you say, you're approaching it slightly calmer, but is it working? Is the big question.
Yeah, it is. I mean, look, I would love to be. I think a lot of women are wedded to a scale weight, and I'm not at the scale weight that in my idea is like if I was a protagonist in a 1990s rom-com, I would be. But I'm really proud of what I've done with my body. I'm much stronger than I've ever been. I'm 45 next month, and I genuinely feel in the best shape of my life. I'm more physically capable than I have ever been. And I don't have to take a heaving, hulking breath before I bend over to do my shoelaces up, which is wonderful, which is a mark of improvement. And
But tell me how did you get to this point? Because I love to hear the facts, and I'm sure lots of men and women listening to this love to hear the fact that you've reached an age where you're happy with your weight, with your physical build, your fitness, your mind, and everything. It sounds like how did you get to that point?
I just I my weight was really up again. I got on the scales and I just wanted to, well, I did cry. And then this was the day after I had my picture taken next to Elizabeth Hurley. And of all the people to have your picture taken next to, Elizabeth Hurley, I mean, try finding a bad picture of Elizabeth Hurley on the internet, because it does not exist. That woman is perfection. And I stood next to her and I saw the picture, and I wanted to just evaporate. I was just ashamed. I was so ashamed of how I looked. And so instinctively that energy came back, and I was like, right, I'm going to muster you again. I'm going to muster you again. I'm going to go running every day, and I'm going to only live on 1,200 calories. And that's what I'm going to do. And if I do that for 5 months, I'll probably lose the weight I need to lose. And then I just thought, I'm too old for this shit. I can't do that again. I just can't. There has to be another way. And so I just leaned really hard into science. And so science is just energy balance, calorie deficit. I was like, okay, if I can get myself into a calorie deficit consistently for a period of time, science says this weight's going to come off. So that's what I did. And I thought, right, I'm not going to exercise every day. But what I am going to do is I'm going to do a leg workout on a Monday, an arm workout on a Wednesday, and a full body on a Friday. So I'm going to do 3 workouts a week. So not hammering every day. I'm going to make sure I get lots of steps in, just go for nice walks, and make sure I'm active every day. But again, I'm going to trust the science of that. I'm toning up my legs, working on my arms, doing full body, getting my heart rate up. And that's what did it. It was taking out this kind of huge pressure and just going, science says that if I get myself into a calorie deficit, and the food that I'm eating within those calories are nutrient dense, so I'm not eating junk, I'm eating lean protein, vegetables, whole grains, that kind of stuff. If I do that and I'm consistent with it, and I'm really consistent with the exercise, I'm going to get to where I need to be. And that's what happened.
Well, good luck with that. Let's see where that goes. It looks like it's working. The fact that you've got a great smile, you're looking healthy, you're looking and sounding great. Emma, thank you so much for sharing so many different elements of who you are, actually, because it sounds like, it sounds like you've been on a roller coaster. You've hit some really high points and you've hit some really low points. And at the moment, it sounds like you found the right place for you. No doubt it goes down and it goes up again, because that's your personality, and that's great, isn't it? Because there's nothing wrong with having a personality that is a bit of a roller coaster, and that you can think differently and see things differently, and it all comes with experience and time. So thank you so much for sharing that experience and time, and I'm sure lots of people listening to this, both male and females, will get a lot from it, the young and the older. I wouldn't say old, but the older, who have been on and will go on the same journey you've been on, if not themselves, their children or their relatives. So thank you for sharing what you've shared with me. If there was one message that you would give to, I hesitate to say to yourself when you were young, because we explored that a little bit, but to those young boys and girls who all of a sudden they change through no fault of their own, and they're now being, because that's the one thing that's really stuck with me, a lot of what we talked about, but it was that moment you talked about being a young teenager or slightly younger, when things changed for you and people saw you differently, spoke to you differently, made comments that I believe probably had a long-lasting impact and kind of manifested itself into some of the challenges that you face. That's what it sounds like to me. Whether I'm right or wrong, I don't know. But what would you say to those parents who are making those little comments to their kids or to their nieces and nephews, or just friends, mates, when they sort of say, well, don't eat that would be too much, and they're saying it out of kindness, but actually some of these negative comments to teenagers who are struggling with a few spots or a little bit of overweight or the change in shape of their body, what would you say?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head there when you said it's a helpful comment, because fundamentally, to say to somebody, eat a bit less, is kind of what I talked about a minute ago. But it's what that person internalizes. And as a kid, what I internalized was you're wrong, you're broken, and you need to change. And it made me feel like I somehow had gone down in that person's estimation or that person's love. And so to get back to where we were, I needed to change physically. And so I don't know as if it's about changing it's saying how, it's changing how you say something, I think. And actually, a kid doesn't know necessarily how to nourish themselves. So my position, I think, would be to find out what's really going on. I definitely was a highly anxious child, and that wasn't diagnosed. I'm sure it would be caught now if I was a kid now, because schools are really hot on that stuff. But I was obviously really anxious, and I wonder whether if you took a teacher from now and put them back in my school when I was in the 80s, they would say, "Oh, she's self-soothing with food," and that would have been the thing that would have needed to be solved. So I don't think it's as simple as don't say that or do say that or say it slightly differently. I think these things are really convoluted, but I think if there is a parent or an adult or a guardian who has observed physical changes in a child and think it might be food related, I would, before you start restricting or talking about what that looks like, I would be looking at the behavior and wondering what might have changed and whether the behavior can be corrected, because it's the behavior that might be the issue, not the individual or the look or the plate of food.
And I suppose it's what you said just a moment ago about, you know, how you go about your eating habits or exercise now. Your behaviour has changed, and that's more conducive to your state of mind and well-being, because, you know, when you were at it 7 days a week, twice a day, and then had a moment of weakness because you were unwell through a flu, you beat yourself up. Whereas now you can allow that space for the flu to come in, feel unwell, and then just get back on it because you're not trying to meet certain targets. Last question from me, Emma. When you sit down and you have these conversations with someone like me who's asking you about your life experiences, your journey, no doubt it conjures up moments, you know, of memory, of reflection and emotions and whatnot. How are you feeling now, having had some of this conversation about some of the things that you've probably talked about a million times, but not with me?
You know, honestly, I'm being really honest here. It's an actual feeling of oh God, did I sound like a knob? I've almost completely invalidated everything that I've shared with you by thinking that, oh, I shouldn't have said that. So I tend to go through that, but I have really enjoyed it because you've pushed me in a way that I think is I will take a lot from this conversation, because you've made me think about things in a way that I think has been really useful. But yeah, my initial reaction with anything like that is, oh God, someone's going to listen to this and think I'm a knob. So,
And you're doing what you're famous for, right? You're doing, and I'm going to describe it like that. You're doing what and saying what you're famous for. Someone who questions themselves and reflects on themselves quite harshly, quite quickly. Well, let me reassure you that you've not sounded like a knob, or you've not sounded like you've not thought about what it is that you talk about. You do, and you articulate it in a way where you can see your mind working. I can see you're protecting yourself, but also revealing yourself. I can see that you're trying to say, look, these are issues that I had to deal with, other people have to deal with, and you don't have the magic bullet, and we find it in our own way. So thank you for being honest and open, as much as you felt comfortable being open and honest, because, you know, I'm asking you questions, you're sharing with people who've never heard you before some of your most intimate details, but I'm sure lots of people take away from these intimate details something that they can put to use in their own life. And whether we like it or not, we do inspire people when we share our most intimate kind of personal details, because that's what people are looking for. Sometimes they are looking for people like yourself who have struggled with the issues that you struggled with, but also the success that you've had in your life. You know, oh my God, if Emma, who says that she had all these internal issues going on, can be so successful in the work that she did, even if she kind of wasn't happy with the outcome, you were and have been a phenomenal success in your career. And, you know, you just talked about standing next to bloody Liz Hurley, you know, and all these other people. And I know that's not a mark of your success. It may be that they're telling people they stood next to Emma Guns. You know, you don't know what they might be saying. You know, Liz Hurley might sort of picture because, like you said, you made her look great, you know, because you felt that you didn't. Waffle, but Emma, great. Thank you so much for spending time with me. It's really appreciated.
No, it's
Thanks
a pleasure.
for sharing your story. Thank you for watching or listening to the Second Chance podcast, where we share stories of redemption, hope, resilience, and second chances. Who deserves a second chance? Who has the right to give someone a second chance? And is a second chance even deserved? That's what Second Chance is all about. So subscribe if you want to be kept up to date with new episodes.